طی قرن‌های متمادی جنگی شگفت‌آور در سراسر اقیانوس‌های دنیا در سطح و البته زیر امواج دریا در جریان بوده.
You could kill hundreds of people with one broadside. These were extremely powerful war machines.
سازندگان کشتی‌های بزرگتر و سریعتر را برای تحت تاثیر قرار دادن دشمنانشان طراحی می‌کردند.
That nation that has most powerful battleship fleet can destroy the enemy's battleship fleet and therefore control the seas. And if you control the seas, you control the world.
این کشتی‌ها مجهز به سلاح‌های ترسناک بودند.
This was going to be the first time that somebody had fired a torpedo in anger since World War II. They needed to get it right.
اما کشتی‌ها علاوه بر این باعث آزادی و نجات جان هزاران نفر هم شدند.
You can think of Gerda 3 as basically a lifeboat for persons hunted by the Nazis.
و الهام بخش مردان و زنان برای انجام اقداماتی شجاعانه بودند.
I will take you there now. To your cannons, to your death. We will sink before surrender.
این کشتی‌ها و خدمشون تاریخ دنیا رو شکل دادند.
As the commanding officer of a missile-carrying submarine, I was directly responsible for helping to prevent World War III.
در این قسمت قدم به دنیای کشتی‌های جنگی قدرتمند چوبی می‌گذاریم.
They were the most sophisticated pieces of technology on the planet.
We think that the best part of 6,000 oak trees go into her construction. There is not a bigger object made by the hand of man.
از آشفتگی وحشت‌آور عرشه توپخانه
It's described by one of the officers as hell on earth.
تا مرگ با افتخار در نبرد، داستان‌هایی از افراد پیشرو، قهرمانان و رویای سرنگون کردن بزرگترین ابرقدرت دنیا.
The Americans never thought for a moment they could defeat the Royal Navy. But here was a chance, 1-to-1.
These timbers had not seen daylight since she foundered on this spot in July 1545.
آب‌های کم عمق سولنت نزدیک به ساحل جنوبی انگلستان در سال 1982 صحنه وقوع مشهورترین عملیات بازیابی دنیا بود. 60 میلیون نفر در سراسر دنیا برای اولین بار پس از گذشت 400 سال یکی از اولین کشتی‌های جنگی بزرگ چوبی رو مشاهده کردند.
She broke the surface to the sounds of a celebration.
پس از بیش از 30 سال کار جهت بازسازی، لاشه این کشتی حالا در معرض دید عموم قرار گرفته. نام این کشتی مری روز است.
Here is the hull of the Mary Rose. We've got the starboard side from the keel right the way up to the beginning of the bow castle, or where the bow castle would have been. So you're looking at the inside of basically half a ship.
گلولای کف دریا به مدت 437 سال نگهبان بقایای این کشتی جنگی متعلق به خانواده سلطنتی تودور بود. مری روز از تاکتیک‌های دریایی گرفته تا جاه طلبی‌های ملی نکات قابل توجهی رو در مورد شخصیت سازندش یعنی هنری هشتم برای باستانشناسان روشن کرده.
When he came to the throne, he only inherited 5 ships from his father. By the time Mary Rose sinks in 1545, within the fleet there are 53 vessels, 20 of them are great warships.
پیش از دوران هنری، کشتی‌ها جهت جابجایی ارتش مورد استفاده قرار می‌گرفت. مری روز یک نقطه تحول به شمار می‌اومد. نیروی دریایی هنری نقشی هجومی‌تر پیدا کرد.
I think you could call her the first proper built warship based on the fact that she is a gun platform for fighting at sea. But what one has to imagine is that it was crammed full of 39 big guns on their carriages, another 20 swivel guns. You've got the soldiers, 185 soldiers, 200 mariners, 30 gunners. You then have the officers and their crew. So you're talking about 500 people.
باستانشناسان با بررسی لاشه ترکیبی جالب از تکنولوژی‌های جدید و قدیمی رو مشاهده کردند. اسکلت کماندارانی پیدا شد که هنوز سلاح به دست داشتند. جعبه‌های حاوی پیکان‌ها و کمان‌های بزرگ هم به دست اومد که از برج لندن ارسال شده بودند. در مجموع 138 کمان بزرگ کشف شد.
These are absolutely unbelievable. They're made of one single stave of yew, which has two different qualities, really. It's got the back of the bow, the flat bit, is a bit that stretches. It's the sapwood of the tree, so it actually allows the bow to bend. And here, this D section is actually the heartwood, which is the center of the tree, and that's really good under compression, so it makes a natural spring with the two different qualities of the same piece of branch.
خدمه مری روز به عنوان بخشی از نیروی دریایی رزمی هنری با خطرات زیادی روبرو بودند، اما شرایط زندگی اونها معمولاً از نیروهای حاضر در خشکی بهتر بود.
Life at sea wasn't too bad because you knew you got food every day. The rations were good. You had fish a couple of days a week, you had meat a few days a week, and it was a guaranteed amount, portioned out. You had beer, a gallon of beer a day. What more could you want? However, that doesn't mean that they didn't occasionally run out, because all of these ships had to be provisioned at sea. So some of the wonderful letters we have that are written actually in the Mary Rose say, for goodness sake, send us some food. There was never a ship so sorely provisioned as ours. We're running out of beer and the meat that you sent has gone foul.
داخل لاشه تعدادی قابل توجه از اشیاء سالم کشف شد که شرایط زندگی در نیروی دریایی تودورها رو برامون روشن‌تر میکنه.
Believe it or not, this is one of the many parts of a basket that we recovered from the ship. Baskets were used for all sorts of things. We had one basket that had loads of shoes in it. The carpenter had baskets that had some of his tools in it and then just offcuts of wood. We had a basket with plum stones in it. We had fish that were stored in a basket at one end of the ship. Obviously, the only motive power was sail, so we have hundreds of rigging blocks, literally hundreds of different sorts. So these are just a series of different types. So this is a single sheave pulley block. Sometimes the insides, the sheaves are of brass or copper alloy. Sometimes like this, they're wood. They're all of different sizes, and obviously each have a particular position on the ship and a particular role. This is quite interesting in that it's two, so it's a double sheave pulley block. And still has the rope in it. Many of them did.
لاشه مری روز نکات بسیاری رو مشخص کرده، اما تا به حال پاسخ بزرگترین معما رو روشن نکرده. این کشتی اصلاً چرا غرق شده؟ نکته‌ای که میدونیم اینه که کشتی فرماندهی هنری هشتم در برابر یک ناوگان هجومی فرانسوی شامل 128 کشتی و 30,000 نفر نیرو غرق شد. پادشاه 80 کشتی رو جهت جلوگیری از ورود اونها به بندر پورتسموث اعزام کرده بود. در صبح روز 19 ژوئیه، هنری شخصاً از برج‌های قلعه ساوتسی شاهد آغاز نبرد بود. هر دو ناوگان در ابتدا آرام بودند، اما مدتی بعد شرایط آب و هوایی تغییر کرد.
We do have eyewitness accounts of it, and the best account actually says that towards the late afternoon or towards evening, it says, a wind picked up so that the English could actually set sail. And so they go out to meet the French, and it says quite specifically that the Mary Rose fired guns on one side of the ship, and she was turning to bring the guns on the other side to bear when she sank on the side of the gun she just fired.
باز بودن دریچه خروجی توپ‌های سمت راست کشتی هنگام بازیابی مری روز و پوشیده شدن سرلوله‌ها با گلولای صحت این ادعا رو ثابت می‌کنه.
So the gun ports are open. The moment the gun ports reach the water line, water will engulf the ships. That's how the Mary Rose sank. Water went in through the open gun ports. What got to that situation, we don't know.
چرا کشتی تا این حد پایین اومده که دریچه‌های خروجی توپ باعث پایین رفتنش بشن؟ فرضیه اول، سلاح‌های ترسناک چدنی موجود کشتی رو بیش از حد سنگین کرده بودند. اما سلاح‌ها در لندن داخل کشتی قرار داده شده بود و مری روز این فاصله رو در امتداد کانال بدون واژگون شدن طی کرده بود. فرضیه دوم، توپ‌های فرانسوی‌ها بدنه کشتی رو در زیر سطح آب سوراخ کردند.
Had she been hit, because the French categorically say we sank her by our gunfire.
هنوز هم امکان یافتن پاسخ وجود داره. مری روز کماکان نکات جدیدی رو برای محققان آشکار میکنه. در سال 2005 لنگری در سولنت کشف شد. محققان ممکنه بالاخره روزی معمای سرنوشت این کشتی جنگی بزرگ رو کشف کنند.
The Mary Rose has not yielded up all her secrets. There's still a lot to come, I think.
دو نیم قرن پس از غرق شدن مری روز، یک ناوگان بریتانیایی دیگر پیروزی بزرگی رو در برابر فرانسوی‌ها به دست آورد. پیروزی که کشتی فرماندهی ناوگان رو به شهرتی بزرگ رسوند.
Although when we look at ships like Victory today, they seem rather old-fashioned. In their day, they were the most sophisticated pieces of technology on the planet.
کارگاه کشتیسازی پورتسموث در انگلستان زادگاه یک بانوی بزرگ و قدیمی دریایی است. کشتی که 200 سال پس از غرق شدن مری روز ساخته شده و مشهورترین شناور در دورانی به شمار میاد که کشتی‌های جنگی چوبی به عنوان خطرناکترین ماشین‌های جنگی شناخته می‌شدند. این HMS ویکتوری است.
She's the largest warship in the world when she's laid down. We think there's the best part of 6,000 oak trees go into her construction. There is not a bigger object made by the hand of man. Well, today, she is the sole surviving line of battleships. You can't see one of these things anywhere else.
هنگام ساخت ویکتوری در دهه 60 قرن 18 طراحی دریایی نسبت به دوران تودورها و زمان ساخت کشتی‌های جنگی اولیه تغییرات قابل توجهی داشت. مری روز یک کشتی بادبانی موسوم به کاراک بود، شناوری با 3 دکل و عرشه‌ای بلند که برای تیراندازی کمانداران به سمت کشتی‌های دشمن مناسب بود. این طراحی از قرن 14 تا 16 مورد استفاده قرار می‌گرفت.
The problem with ship design at that point is that it's still based on the idea that you are going to fight a land battle at sea, almost. So one is going to approach the enemy, board them in hand-to-hand combat and capture their ships. So although she has a lot of guns, only a few of them are heavy guns that can really damage a ship. And the idea is that almost like a cavalry charge, your ships will sail against the enemy line abreast. They'll turn just as they meet them. They'll fire a broadside. If that has a decisive effect, they'll then board the enemy.
اما کاراک ها در برابر دشمنی به شدت قدیمی به نام گالی دچار مشکل می شدند. گالی میتونست با استفاده از توپ‌های سنگین در سینه کشتی مستقیم به سمت یک کشتی حرکت کرده و بهش حمله کنه.
That brings about a change in the design of the carrack. The galleon's introduced. And the galleon has guns mounted in the eyes right at the head of the ship so it can attack as you go into battle.
اما اندازه کشتی‌ها و تعداد توپ‌های همراه اونها به سرعت افزایش پیدا کرد.
The galleon, over a period of around about 80-90 years, eventually gives way to the idea of the line of battleship, where no longer will you come into battle line abreast, but your aim is to bring about a tactic where all of your heavy guns on the ship's side can be brought to bear with most effect against an enemy. And that means your fellow ships have to be ahead of you and behind you, not to your sides. So that gives rise to the line of battle, these long lines, 15, 20, 25, 30 ships in some cases by the late 18th and early 19th century.
شکل نهایی تکامل یافته کشتی‌های جنگی چوبی با عنوان کشتی جنگی بزرگ شهرت پیدا کرد.
These carried the same artillery as an entire army ashore. Each ship. It was an extraordinary concentration of firepower. And what these ships could do to each other, particularly if they raked each other, they fired cannonballs from the stern forward in a ship. You could knock out a ship, you could kill hundreds of people with one broadside. These were extremely powerful war machines.
کشتی جنگی درجه یکی همچون HMS ویکتوری از پایه به عنوان یک سکوی توپخانه شناور طراحی شده بود.
The first question that is asked is what are the type of guns she's going to carry and what is the weight of that gun. So we're using muzzle loaders, 42-pounders. We are going to carry 30 of them on the lower deck. That gives us a deck length. We need 10 feet in between each gun, 150 feet of deck. You then round that deck off at one end, you blunt it off at the other, and you stack the decks up. So once you've worked out where all the guns are going to go, where the magazines are going to go, and where the supplies are going to go, you slot the men in, over and in between and around that equipment.
Although when we look at ships like Victory today, they seem rather old-fashioned, in their day, they were items of wonder. I mean, they were the most sophisticated pieces of technology on the planet.
توپ‌های ویکتوری توسط سربازانی کاملاً آموزش دیده شلیک می‌شد. سربازانی که اهل کشورهای مختلف بودند.
There were 20-odd nationalities on board the ship. There were even a few Frenchmen on board the ship at Trafalgar, but there were Americans, Maltese, Germans, Dutch, Caribbean, African. So there were lots of different nationalities. Of course, there were English, Scottish and Welsh. And they would have been a fairly rough bunch, basically. You would not want to meet them in a dark alley walking down the road. In charge of each gun would be a gun captain. And then there's an assistant captain, a loader, assistant loader, a rammer, assistant rammer, and then various other men that would help physically move the gun around. It would take about 90 seconds for a British crew to fire and reload their guns. These guns are all muzzle-loading guns, so everything has to be pushed down the front. The first thing they would use is a sponge. It looks like a large cotton bud. They dip that into a bucket of water and push it down the barrel. They're doing that for two reasons, really. One is to help cool the barrel down, because if the barrels become too hot, they may explode. The other one is really just to make sure there's nothing left burning inside the barrel before they start pushing the next gunpowder charge in. And then finally, they start to use the rammer. That's what you load the gun with. So the first thing to be rammed down would be the gunpowder charge. That comes up on deck in a canvas bag, and it's pushed straight down the gun. Then you put the ammunition in, usually a round shot, a cannonball. The Royal Naval guns were fitted with gun locks. That's a simple flintlock mechanism like you find on a musket or a pistol. And you just put on a piece of string, and it creates sparks, and it ignites the gunpowder inside the barrel.
در اوج نبرد، عرشه توپخانه با دودی غلیظ پر می‌شد. صدای ایجاد شده برای خونریزی گوش‌های افراد کافی بود.
So the whole ship is shaking from your own guns going off. And of course you can't forget that the enemy are not that far away, and they're firing balls through the side of the ship as well. So it will be horrific. It's described by one of the officers as hell on earth. And that's probably the best description you can think of a gun deck during the height of a battle.
شرایط بر فراز عرشه هم به همین اندازه خطرناک بود. مردان مسئول 37 بادبان کشتی طی هر بار بالا رفتن از دکل زندگی خودشونو به خطر مینداختند. جثه هر شخص محل کارشو مشخص میکرد.
So right down the bottom you have the largest sails, so you want some of the biggest men to be down there because the sails are very heavy. Right at the top you want some fairly light men because the sails aren't as big as the other sails. And if you fall from a height of about 150 feet, the water is going to be like hitting concrete. It's not going to do you much good. And of course they might not be able to rescue you from the water either.
اما خطرناکترین نقطه روی عرشه ویکتوری دماغه کشتی بود. تیری چوبی موسوم به باو اسپریت.
The bowsprit was often known as the widowmaker. Really, if you fall into the water, the ship's going to run you over.
جدا از بحث خطر، ویکتوری از نمادهای دریانوردی به شمار میاد. اما این کشتی در صورت عدم حضور مشهورترین دریانوردش یعنی هوراشیو نلسون اکنون اینجا نبود.
Use your initiative, be aggressive, that will win the day.
نلسون زیرک و شجاع در تلاش بود کشورش رو به بزرگترین قدرت دریایی تبدیل کنه، اما رسیدن به این هدف بهای بالایی داشت. HMS ویکتوری، بزرگترین و مجهزترین کشتی دوران خود از دید جنگ افزاری. اما تبدیل شدن ویکتوری به مشهورترین کشتی جنگی چوبی به شخصی که اونو رهبری میکرد برمیگشت. هوراشیو نلسون. نلسون در سال 1758 متولد شده و فرزنده یک کشیش بود. انتظارات زیادی از او وجود نداشت، اما در 12 سالگی به دریا فرستاده شده و تحت نظر عمویش که کاپیتان کشتی بود مشغول کار شد. عموی او می‌نویسد هوراشیوی بیچاره که تا این حد ضعیف است چه اشتباهی مرتکب شده که حالا باید برای جبرانش به دریا فرستاده شود. اما این کارآموز جوان خیلی سریع توانایی خودش رو به عنوان دریانوردی عالی اثبات کرد.
By the age of 15, he has crossed the Atlantic, been over to the West Indies, crossed into the Arctic Circle. So he has a very intense early education actually in ship handling and seamanship. And people feel that this is where he learned some of the habits that he used later as a leader.
نلسون مستقیما خودشو درگیر کار می‌کرد. آسیب دیدگی‌های او به بخشی از افسانه‌اش تبدیل شدند. او دست راست و بینایی یکی از چشم‌هاشو از دست داد. این افسر بیباک به بتی برای مردم بریتانیا تبدیل شد.
The first time that he's really noticed is in 1797, what's called the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. And he takes this incredibly daring maneuver where he takes his ship out of its position, attacks one Spanish ship, captures it, and then incredibly captures another.
اما بزرگترین موفقیت نلسون 8 سال بعد به دست اومد. در سال 1804 امپراتور فرانسه ناپلئون بناپارت اتحادی با اسپانیا تشکیل داد. او با بزرگتر شدن قابل توجه ناوگان حالا فرصتی بهتر برای حمله به بریتانیا داشت. وظیفه شکار کشتی‌های اسپانیایی فرانکو و به قول نلسون نابود کردن آنها به عهده قهرمان دریانوردی بریتانیا قرار داده شد. در 29 سپتامبر سال 1805 ناوگان بریتانیا نزدیک به ساحل پرتغال حضور داشت. دشمنشون هم در همون نزدیکی حاضر بود. آدمیرال نلسون و 27 کاپیتان او اینجا در کابین غذاخوری ویکتوری گرد هم آمدند. او استراتژی خود رو توضیح داد.
It's very important that they understand the formation of the line of battle that they're getting into for sailing, but very important also that they understand, when and where they should take the initiative. So Nelson says, no captain can do very wrong if he places his ship alongside that of the enemy. So what he's saying is, use your initiative, be aggressive, and that will win the day.
گفته میشه کاپیتان‌ها به قدری نقشه فرماندهشون رو پسندیدند که برخی اشک شوق ریختند. صبح روز 21 اکتبر 2 ناوگان بالاخره رو در روی هم قرار گرفتند. محل رویارویی کیپ ترافالگار بود. نلسون پیش از نبرد سخنرانی الهام بخشی از عرشه ویکتوری انجام داد. انگلستان انتظار دارد تک تک افراد وظیفه خود را انجام دهند. نقشه نلسون غیر معمول بود. او به جای حرکت موازی با دشمن ناوگان را در 2 ستون آرایش کرد. یک ناوگان توسط نلسون در ویکتوری و دیگری توسط آدمیرال کالینگوود در رویال ساورن رهبری میشد. هدف این بود که با ذهنیتی هجومی شکافی در خط دشمن ایجاد بشه.
It is quite a risky job. You line your ships up in 2 lines and sail at the enemy. That means that they can fire at you when you can only fire a few forward-facing cannons at them. So you're taking a lot of punishment.
نلسون خود کشتی فرماندهی فرانسوی‌ها به نام بوسنتور رو در نظر گرفته بود.
He takes victory through a gap in their line of ships and rakes the stern of the Bucentaur. And raking is when you fire your whole broadside as you pass through the weakest part of a ship, which is its stern. So very early on, he knocks the Bucentaur out of action. That's very important. And then his ships can pour through the line behind him.
توپ‌های کناری ویکتوری مرگبار و فوق‌العاده هماهنگ بودند. اما نه به اون اندازه‌ای که شنیده اید.
So the broadside you'd see in the films is all the guns going off at the same time. You can't actually do that, because if you did that, it would roll the ship. So you start at one end, probably more often than not at the bow of the ship, and the fire slowly rolls down the deck, so as each gun fires, it fires in sequence.
پس از کنار زدن بوسنتور، مسیر حرکت ویکتوری توسط کشتی فرانسوی ردوتابل مسدود شد.
And literally kind of locked together, and they are firing their guns at very close proximity with pretty severe carnage, particularly on the side of the Redoutable.
British crews would take about 90 seconds to fire and reload the guns. The French and Spanish crews were taking between 3 and 5 minutes, because they'd had far less practice.
پس از 4 ساعت درگیری شدید، ناوگان فرانسه تسلیم شد. اونها 6000 نیروی خودشون رو از دست داده بودند، رقمی که برای بریتانیایی‌ها 1700 نفر بود. اما به فهرست افراد جان باخته نام نلسون هم اضافه شد. یک تیرانداز ماهر در ردوتابل موقعیت نلسون رو شناسایی کرده و اونو مورد هدف قرار داد. آدمیرال به پایین برده شد، اما تنها چند ساعت زنده موند.
In a very difficult scene. I mean, this is a scene where amputations are going on, where people are crying in agony, and where he is, yes, he's made comfortable, but he is dying ultimately alongside his men. Very famously, he is visited by the captain of the ship, Captain Hardy, and Hardy is able to tell him about an hour before he dies that we've won a great victory. So he dies with that knowledge.
در ماه دسامبر HMS ویکتوری با ظاهری آسیب دیده جسد نلسون رو به انگلستان بازگرداند. امیدهای ناپلئون برای تصرف بریتانیا نقش برآب شده بود. نلسون و ویکتوری برتری بریتانیا رو در اقیانوس‌ها ثابت کرده بودند. برتری که تا بیش از 1 قرن دیگر ادامه یافت. اما همزمان با جشن گرفتن پیروزی به دست آمده، نیروی دریای بریتانیا در حال تلاش برای بهبود نسل بعدی کشتی‌های جنگی چوبی خود بود. کشتی‌هایی که از دید یک دریانورد زیباترین اونها به شمار می اومد. ناوچه. یکی از 2 ناوچه بریتانیایی مربوط به اون دوران رو میتونیم اکنون در هارتلیپول در شمال انگلستان مشاهده کنیم. HMS ترینکومالی. صاف بودن عرشه بالای این کشتی باعث شده از ارتفاعی کم و سرعتی بالا برخوردار باشه. جنگ افزاراش هم آرایش متفاوتی داره.
This single rank of main armament guns is what makes a frigate a frigate. You can always tell a frigate it's got this single rank of guns. They found that longer ships, lower in the water, were actually a more seaworthy way of producing a fast ship carrying a moderately good armament. The ships of the line, with their double or triple ranks of guns, these were the ships which actually fought the main battles in the line of battle. These frigates supported the ships of the line, scouted for them, and also engaged in a huge range of other operations, notably commerce raiding and commerce defense.
دریانوردها عاشق ناوچه ها بودند چون فضای بیشتری برای زندگی داشته و با بودن کاپیتانی لایق در کنارشون از غنایم قابل توجه برخوردار می شدند.
Frigates were very popular ships, much more popular than ships of the line. They often had famous captains who were good at getting prize money, so as well as being more comfortable, you could get a lot richer as well.
در سلطه بریتانیا بر دریاها تردیدی نبود، اما مشکلی هم وجود داشت. تعداد کشتی‌های ساخته شده برای نبرد با ناپلئون به قدری زیاد بود که چوب بلوط بریتانیایی کمیاب شد. بنابراین کشور به منابع خارجی و به امپراتوری رو به گسترش خود روی آورد و به جایگزینی عالی رسید. ساج.
Teak is a really superior shipbuilding material and it's very hard. It's resistant to seawater. It rots at a much slower pace than oak. It's much more resistant to shipworms, which ships were attacked by.
Teak was actually probably better than oak in some ways, although the sailors were very suspicious of it. They said that their wounds festered because wood splinters were very important wound producers as the cannonballs came into the ship. Whether they did fester or not is another matter, but that was a sort of old sailor's tale.
اما مهمتر از همه بریتانیایی‌ها از امکان دسترسی ساده به منابع گسترده از ساج در هندوستان برخوردار بودند. ترینکومالی در بمبئی تحت نظارت یک کشتیساز چیره دست به نام جمست جی جومانجی وادیر ساخته شد. از او خواسته شده بود کشتی کاملا بریتانیایی بسازه، اما او بخشی از اصول سنتی مورد استفاده در خانواده خود را هم به کار گرفت. خانواده وادیر زرتشتی بودند، آیینی باستانی که مراسمی بسیار مهم داشت.
When the keel was laid down, obviously that's the first piece of the ship to be laid down in the dry dock. They would have a ceremony whereby a silver nail was hammered into the keel. There was a sort of a purification ceremony, and it was attended by a Parsi priest, and there was all sorts of ceremony, flowers. I often wonder whether the silver nail is still there somewhere.
وجود پیشه‌های خاص ساختاری و فیل‌های چوبی حکاکی شده در عقب کشتی، ترینکومالی را به تنها بخش از نیروی دریایی سلطنتی تبدیل کرده که حاوی میراثی واقعی از بمبئی است. اما بریتانیا تنها کشوری نبود که کشتی‌های جنگی چوبی می‌ساخت. ایالات متحده هم به ساخت ناوچه‌ها روی آورد. اما ناوچه‌های اونها بزرگتر و بهتر بودند. آمریکایی‌ها با شروع جنگ از شانس خوبی در برابر دشمن قدیمی برخوردار بودند.
The Americans never thought for a moment they could defeat the Royal Navy in a stand-up fight. But here was a chance, 1-to-1, frigate to frigate.
بریتانیا در قرن 19 فرمانروای امواج به شمار می اومد، اما یک ملت با استعداد و جوان ترسی از اونها نداشتند.
The Americans knew they could not build ships of the line, too expensive, too big, too difficult. But the Americans could build the next size ship below that, which were known as frigates.
مسئولیت ساخت این شناورهای تازه به عهده کشتیساز اهل فیلادلفیا به نام جاشوا هامفریز بود.
And it was his notion that they would be what we might call frigates on steroids.
His genius, I think, was in taking the best of European design and combining them into something that, in the end, was uniquely American.
یکی از این ناوچه‌های تقویت شده هنوز باقی مونده و اکنون در بوستون در دست بازسازی است. این ناوچه USS Constitution نام داره.
Conventional frigate in the age of sail would carry between 32 and 36 guns, sometimes 38. The Constitution was rated as a 44-gun frigate and did carry as many as 60. It could outrun anything that was more powerful. It could defeat anything that could catch it. So in some curious ways, it was a kind of pocket battleship.
کانستیتیوشن مدتی بعد فرصت اثبات توانایی‌های خودش رو در برابر قدرت بریتانیا پیدا کرد. ایالات متحده که از محدود شدن تجارتشون و به کار گرفته شدن اجباری شهروندان در نیروی دریایی بریتانیا خشمگین بود، در ژوئن سال 1812 علیه صاحبان قدیمی مستعمره اعلان جنگ کرد. برخلاف انتظارات، آمریکایی‌ها شانس خوبی برای پیروزی خود قائل بودند.
That seems like a very David and Goliath sort of fight, but in fact, the British Navy was strung out all over the world. The entire Royal Navy wasn't coming to the coast of North America to fight the Americans.
The Americans never thought for a moment they could defeat the Royal Navy in a stand-up fight. But here was a chance, frigate to frigate, 1-to-1.
USS Constitution توسط کاپیتان آیزاک هال هدایت می‌شد. او از زمان شروع جنگ توپچی‌های خودش رو برای درگیری با بریتانیایی‌ها آماده کرده بود.
He knew if he was going to sail out from the United States, he was going to meet a warship of the Royal Navy that would have a very well-trained crew, very professional officers. So he wanted to be, of the same caliber as those men. The big feather in the cap for any American captain would be to capture a British ship of equal or greater size, and he is very intent on doing that.
بنابراین آیزاک هال به شکار کشتی‌های بریتانیایی رفت. در 19 اوت 1812 در فاصله 1000 کیلومتری از بوستون یک ناوچه در افق پدیدار شد. این کشتی متعلق به بریتانیایی‌ها گریر نام داشت که 5 سال پیش از آن از فرانسوی‌ها گرفته شده بود.
In the age of sail, almost all ships fit a certain type. They were not significantly different from one another. When the British captured French ships, they often took the ships into the Royal Navy, and Royal Navy sailors could go on board and run them just as if they were a Royal Navy ship.
کانستیتیوشن و گریر به یکدیگر نزدیکتر شده و هر دو به دنبال قرار گرفتن در بهترین موقعیت جهت درگیری بودند.
Captain of that British ship, James Richard Dacres, was a young officer, only about 24 years old, but had been in the Navy for a long time, had seen some pretty hard service. So he was no novice. Neither was Isaac Hull, though, the American captain.
ساعت 5 بعد از ظهر نبرد آغاز شد. هر دو با توپ‌های کناری یکدیگر را هدف قرار دادند. اما گلوله‌های گریر یا خطا می‌رفت و یا به بدنه بلوطی و سخت کانستیتیوشن برخورد می‌کرد.
It became clear very shortly that the American gunnery was superior to the British gunnery. A seaman named Moses Smith in the 1840s published a memoir about his time in the US Navy. And he says that during the engagement, several of the shot from the enemy stuck in their hull. And one of the largest that they could command was seen to bounce off the side. And someone yelled, "Huzzay, her sides are made of iron."
از آن روز به بعد USS Constitution با لقب قدیمی کناره آهنی شناخته شد.
The British ship, on the other hand, really got the worst of it. After a few broadsides, the ship's mizzen mast, the smallest mast at the stern, fell over the side. The foremast followed. So the ship was basically incapacitated. And to preserve the rest of his crew, Captain Dacre surrendered.
گریر تقریباً به لاشه شناور تبدیل شد. اما پیروزی کاپیتان هال هنوز کامل نبود، چون ثروتی قابل توجه به آرامی در مقابل چشمانش در حال غرق شدن بود.
The normal process was to take the enemy ship that they'd captured, fix it up, bring it home. It would be bought into the American Navy. The crew would get a lot of prize money, which they would share amongst themselves. But in this case, they just couldn't. So all the British prisoners and their baggage were transferred to Constitution, and the day after the battle, Guerriere was set on fire and exploded and sank into the North Atlantic.
اما با وجود از دست دادن غنیمت جنگی، کانستیتیوشن همچون یک قهرمان در خانه مورد استقبال قرار گرفت.
Losing one frigate was nothing to the Royal Navy in terms of material, but in terms of morale, this was, I think, a very important moment for America in general, but especially for the American Navy. It's the first time that they were able to say we're equal to our European counterparts.
Interestingly enough, Whitehall did send out an order to all naval captains, ordering them not to take on the American frigates one-to-one. And when the Americans found out about that, they were puffed up with pride. Wow, look at that. They're afraid of us.
کشتی که این موفقیت مهم رو به دست آورد با علاقه فراوان و به عنوان گنجینه ملی طی بیش از 200 سال گذشته حفظ شده.
There was always this interest among the general public of preserving and maintaining this ship as a symbol of America, as important, I think, to a lot of people as the Star-Spangled Banner or the Statue of Liberty.
در اواسط قرن 19 عصر آهن کم کم فرا می رسید. جنگاوری دریایی در آستانه یک دگرگونی بزرگ قرار داشت. اما در لیورپول شناوری وجود داره که آغازگر این تحول بوده. یک اسکونر 3 دکله که در سال 1900 ساخته شد و آخرین نمونه عملیاتی باقی مونده از نوع خود به شمار میاد. این شناور به عنوان یک کشتی ساده حمل بار مورد استفاده قرار می گرفت، اما از آماری غافلگیر کننده در میدان جنگ هم برخوردار بوده. کشتی به نام کاتلین اند می.
Now entering into the cargo hold of the Kathleen and May, although we've got a very nice staircase to come down, it didn't have it in them days. They had to scramble down through the top hatch. But down here, they would pack in over 200 ton of cargo. Over the years, her biggest tonnage was coal, but along with that, she carried general cargo. One particular trip recorded 190 ton of manure. I don't think I would want to have been on that trip. The only space that the crew had for relaxation, if they got such a thing, was down here in the mess. Space for crew was minimal. The money was in cargo, so that's where all the big spaces got used up.
اما فعالیت حرفه‌ای ساده کاتلین اند می تحت تاثیر جنگ جهانی دوم قرار گرفت. نجات بریتانیا مستلزم ادامه رسیدن منابع به بنادر بریتانیایی بود. با توجه به خطر همیشگی حمله‌های یوبوت‌های آلمانی، محموله‌های بزرگ در اقیانوس اطلس توسط کشتی‌های جنگی همراهی می‌شد. اما شناورهایی مثل کاتلین اند می هم نقش کلیدی بر عهده داشتند و در برخی از خطرناکترین مسیرهای آبی در رفت و آمد بودند.
During the war, she was trading and operating from the southwest coast across to the Irish coast. This was the route that the German U-boats used to take when they came out of the U-boat pens in Brest in France. They would sail through the Irish Sea to get to the North Sea and then do as much damage to our convoys as possible.
کشتی‌های باری بادبانی علاوه بر هزینه کم، از ویژگی حیاتی دیگری هم برخوردار بودند. حرکت بی صدا.
Under sail, there was no engine noise, no propellers turning, so there was no trace of her appearing on a sonar screen. She could slip through the waters undetected in many aspects. She could use all the sail, and she carries 4,500 square feet of sail to take her through the water. Not tremendous speeds, but at safe passage, and that was the most important aspect.
کاترین ان می منابع غذایی و سوخت مورد نیاز کشور رو حمل می‌کرد، اما حامل باری بسیار خطرناک هم بود. مقادیری قابل توجه از مواد منفجره.
Catalina May has what they term a volumetric tonnage total of 220 ton. So if you can picture that as being explosives, ammunition, that's quite a lot of dangerous cargo that she carried. It was just accepted that it would be safe. There was no special precautions that they could make at all. And when you look back at the British Navy, going back to Nelson's days, there were wooden ships and there was no protection at all. They just carried their explosives as they were. And exactly the same with the Catalina May.
کاترین ان می در برخی از سفرها محموله‌های دیگری رو هم به صورت پنهانی جابجا می‌کرد.
We have been told by a fairly good government source that she also carried prisoners of war and escapees back from Ireland to England. It was easier to get, say, airmen. The French resistance had managed to conceal, and the easiest route was to take them through Ireland rather than straight here, you see.
صاحبان این کشتی جنگی چوبی فوق‌العاده حسی سراسر تحسین نسبت به خدمش در زمان جنگ دارند.
I personally have gone across the Irish Sea from the southwest coast to Ireland, and I thought how they must have felt. They must have been dreading seeing a periscope or a submarine pop up or anything of that nature, and it's really, really hard to comprehend what they must have been feeling.
نقش این کشتی بادبانی سه دکله زیبا در دوران جنگ حسن ختامی کوتاه بر قرنها فعالیت کشتی‌های چوبی بود. در سال 1945 کشتی‌های جنگی به تدریج جای خودشونو به بهترین کشتی‌های نبرد اون دوران یعنی رزمناوهای قدرتمند میدادند. اما کشتی‌های چوبی همراه با مهارت‌های مورد نیاز جهت هدایتشون قرنهای متمادی بهترین شناورها به شمار می اومدند.
You get to understand the sea when you're trying to use wind as your main means of propulsion. You get an instinct for the weather, and you become closer, if you like, to the environment than you do if you're in a steamer. And I think that was why a lot of people who have been brought up in the days of sail and who ended up with the dreadnoughts of the First World War felt that something significant had been lost.